What's up guys, it's Dynamics here. Welcome to my channel. Now today what I'm going to be doing is giving you guys a tutorial on sub bass. But the nature of this particular sub bass that we're going to focus on is using phase modulation or phase cancellation to make rhythmic timbre or rhythmic beating in our bass. This particular technique was used in a lot of old jungle and old D&B records, and a lot of that was to do with the fact that they were using some mono analog synths or outboard synths. And this is a really powerful technique, and I haven't come across anything on YouTube. As far as I can tell, it might be out there, but I haven't come across anything on YouTube that covers this particular subject in any kind of depth, and it's real powerful. I use this type of technique in my patches all the time. What makes it really good is it's a little bit different from the sort of patches we see where people use a lot of LFOs to create their movement. And those techniques are totally fine. They're completely plausible if that's how you like to do it. But with the technique that I'm going to show you guys today, I really like it because it's a little bit more random. It creates some interesting movement and modulation in my bass lines, and yeah, it's just a style I like. So what we're going to use for this tutorial is we're going to use Vital Synth. The reason I've chosen Vital Synth is because it's a free plugin. You can pick up the free version of it and have full functionality. So if you don't have it, go grab it, and you can follow along with this as you like, or you can just watch the tutorial and take down notes and then go ahead and try this stuff out for yourself. Now, we've got an initial patch opened up. It always opens on a saw wave, so the first thing we're going to do is set up the synth the way we need it to be. So we're going to start with using sine waves. So we're going to go basic shapes, select the sine. You can see through the frames that it changes the different waveforms available in basic shapes. We just want to stick with a sine wave. Now we're going to bring the octave down one because we're working with subs. So -12. All right, and you can hear straight away we've got a bit of a clicking sound. So I'm going to bring up the attack on the envelope to about 7 milliseconds. Usually we'll bite off the front. 5, 6, 7. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to look at this phase tab here, and you can see that the phase is sitting at 100%. And what this does, in case you don't know, is it basically allows the oscillator to start the cycle of the waveform at any point along the path. So this is how analog synthesizers sort of operate. They don't just start from a 0 point every single time. They will start anywhere along the path depending on the oscillator's movement in the circuitry at the time. But for this particular exercise, we're going to bring it down, and we want it to be at 0. So that way it'll always start from a 0 point and flow through the positive and negative movements of the oscillation. You can change the phase of it here. I'm just going to keep it at its default position. And then we're going to go over to our advanced tab soon. But what I want to show you is the way that this was done originally. There's a lot of famous D&B and jungle tunes where you hear this technique used in the bass line. The way they used to do it is they would pick their note, and what they would do is they would either add a semitone above or below. So at the moment we've just got a boring old straight bass, straight sub, straight sine happening. But when we add in a semitone to it, listen to what happens. You hear that movement? And that's that phase cancellation and phase modulation. And what's actually happening is because we've got two different tones, they are cycling at different speeds. And as they're passing through their relative positive and negative movements, there's a point where they cross one another and cancel each other out. And as that happens, it creates this beating sound, this rhythmic sort of movement. And that's the same kind of thing that we hear from putting an LFO on. Like, you know, if I added an LFO and applied it to the level and then hit the key, we get this same kind of effect, but it's a bit different. So we're going to take that off. Now, another way that you can do this is you can set up a second oscillator, and we're going to set it up the same way. So we're going to go to basic shapes. We're going to bring the octave down -12 semitone, so it's dropped 1 octave. We're going to bring our phase down to 0%. And then we go back to our first oscillator. Let's drop this down, say like -25, 26, and we'll bring the other one up a positive 25, 26, thereabouts. Now listen. And we've got that same movement. And what's so cool about this particular style is that depending on whether we're playing lower in the notes or higher in the notes, this rhythmic beating is going to change, basically because the higher the note, the faster the cycles. So we get a faster or slower rhythm. Nice. Cool. Now I'm going to show you guys a far easier way to set this up. So I'm just going to put that off for now, oscillator 2. And we're going to go back over to oscillator 1. We're going to set our tuning back to it 0%. We'll leave it at -12. But what we're going to do is we're going to add in a second voice. So what I'm essentially doing here is making what we've just done, oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, and I'm just packing it inside of oscillator 1. So we're going to add in a second voice. So oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 is the way to think about that. Now we're going to head over to our advanced tab. Now you'll see here in the advanced tab, we've got this thing called stereo unison. And at the moment, the way this is set up by default is that the oscillator is now in unison. It's stereo, so the stereo image is wide. It's left and right. And if you have a look at the analysis here, look at the waveform. So we've got this swimming. We've got these two different tones and cycles playing, because what the voice is doing on the unison is those voices are detuned from one another. It's the same principle of changing the tuning here on oscillator 1 negative and the oscillator 2 positive. So they're out of tune with one another, but the sum of two parts creates a relative pitch to our hearing, to our ear. So as it stands, it's not what I want. And you can see that we've got heaps of stereo information. Now, with subs in particular, you want that to be mono, because, subs are mono speakers. They're not stereo speakers. They're straight through the middle. So we want that to translate in our mix. And it's a lot easier to build basses in mono and then create stereo imaging later than it is to create something with heaps of stereo and then find that we get into phase issues and all sorts of nonsense further down the track when we're working on a mix. So let's take care of this right from the outset, and we're going to have way more control, and we can be a lot safer about all of our sort of relative phase and all of that stuff in our tracks, and we can get a good solid low end. So we're looking at the stereo unison. Now pay attention to the analysis here and watch what happens as I bring the stereo unison down. You see? It's exactly the same effect that we had from either playing two notes side by side, or adding in a second oscillator and detuning it. But we've all got this from one single oscillator, and straight away we've got a bass that is a sub bass that's going to be great to use on a tune. We've got other sounds over the top, and we've got this as a sub bed. It's going to sound wicked. 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 It's going to sound Nice. So right from that point, for those of you out there that have been looking how to make some good subs, if I've helped you to get there, wicked, have fun with it. I am glad I've been able to help you today. But we won't finish just there. There's more that we can do with this, because the nature of this type of bass is, obviously it is a sub, but it's also a sub that integrates rhythmic beating. And for a sub, it doesn't have all this harmonic content over the top to suggest an audible timbre or texture. It's just this low-end information. So by adding rhythm to it, we can really pull a lot more out of our tunes from something really simple. So you'll see on my analyzer that everything is straight down the middle. I've got no weird information going left and right. Everything's locked into the center. Just what I want. Okay, now what is happening here with the stereo unison is, depending on the percentage that we've got, that's going to change how the speed of the rhythmic beating will change. So if I just hit one note, and you'll hear as I bring it up, it speeds up. And if you push it all the way up, you almost get like a ring modulation effect. Right? And then we bring it down, it'll slow it down. Now, we'll just double click this and bring it back to its default percentage of 20%. And we're going to set this patch up so that it is able to be modulated in automation for our tune. So we'll get macro 1 and we'll apply it to the stereo unison percentage. Okay, now we'll turn the macro all the way up, and at its current setting, by default, it'll be too much. Got that ring modulation effect happening now. So let's bring it down until we get to a point where it sounds kind of like a sweet spot. So I'm going to set it about there. Now we'll bring the macro back down and let's name it beating. So we've got that ready for automation when we start working on a tune. Lovely. Now, one thing that I always do when I'm working with patches is I always set myself up with a sound bed, like some music to work around. I find it's really useful to have something that suggests a tune. It just helps me to build my patches because I've got some drums and percussion and maybe something melodic. So in the session at the moment, I've just got a simple patch that I've pulled out of Omnisphere, and then I've got a break of one of my own breaks that I've built and made. So we'll use that as our bed for this particular sub, and we're going to play in a bass line, and then we've got that there to be able to play through and sort of hear what's going on. It's just going to help the process along. So I'm going to record in. Wicked. So what can we do from here? We can go, great, I've got a bass line, I've got a nice sub, that's cool. So we'll just leave it like this for now, but what we'll do is we'll duplicate this instrument. I'm going to mute the original sub that we've made, and now we can use this instance of Vital that's duplicated what we've made to start experimenting a bit. So one thing that we hear a lot in modern drum and bass is this kind of noise bass. And it is essentially that. It is a signal with noise attached to it. And it's actually really easy to do, so I may as well show you guys how to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our effects section and we're going to grab some distortion. We'll bring that to the top of our signal path. And it's always set by default to soft clip. I'm going to use that. You've got a bunch of different modes you can select from here. And we're just going to play our bass line in solo. Keep it cutting through. Okay, so depending on what kind of tune you end up working with, if you've got something that's a bit more minimal, you won't need a whole lot of this. If you've got something more busy, you're maybe going to want a bit more. That's up for you to decide as a creative choice. What this does to a sub is it's going to add more harmonics. So if I bring this all the way off and we have a look at the analyzer, sorry, I'm just going to bring the mix down. We've just got a fundamental and we've got a little bit of a harmonic overtone happening. So as we add in distortion, we start to get more harmonics pull through. And you can see here they're starting to add on. So you get, depending on what type of distortion you're using, you either get even or odd harmonics. And that what that'll do is it'll allow the fundamental to layer on harmonics on the top, and that just helps it to cut through the mix a bit more, so your ears will pick on those upper frequencies a bit. So it creates the illusion of hearing the sub, but remember, you never hear subs, you feel subs because they're way down below. Okay, so back to the noise base. So let's get some noise. Now, something really interesting is going to happen as we apply noise to this. So let's just listen. And I'll start to bring in the noise level. And we're looking for that sweet spot. So about there. So straight away, just like that, you've got a noise bass. I think like the first person I ever really remember having a bass like this was Break. I'm sure there was maybe someone else that had done it, but definitely Break made this sound prominent in a lot of his tunes. Now the thing about noise is we'll just turn off oscillator 1 and we'll just look at noise. You're going to see that on the spectrum here that we've got information going all the way down. All the stuff in the subharmonic area we don't need and we probably don't want. That's all information we don't want. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the noise oscillator, we'll send it over to filter 2 and we'll open up filter 2. We're going to change filter 2 from a low pass filter to a high pass filter. We'll bring this resonance down and we're going to switch it over to 24 decibels per octave cutoff. So straight away we can start to trim away. If you look at the spectrum over here, we're going to trim away the low end information of the noise that we don't need. So right now it's cutting off from about 250 hertz up. So that's good. We've got rid of the low end we don't need. And then of course we'll open up oscillator 1 again and we've got the same audible effects, but we know we've taken care of a bunch of low end that we don't need. If anything, it cleans it up a bit. So there you go. That's how you make a noise bass. And you can make adjustments to the amount of drive. And just hunt for that sweet spot. what's actually happening with this style of bass is we've got our phase modulation, phase cancellation happening from the oscillator that we've already covered. But what happens is when the sine wave or the bass comes up in amplitude, it rises up and it kind of pushes against the noise. So the noise gets pushed away. And then as that sub information comes down in amplitude from the phasing, the noise rises up against it, so that it creates this effect of interpolation between those two signals, and that creates even more rhythm and movement to our sound. So definitely experiment with that. I mean, with what we've got now, if you're thinking about making a tune, we could use the straight sub without noise and then add some of the notes in with that noise bass. And so that can give us some, call and response type techniques happening. Okay, so let's turn off the noise for now, and we're going to look at other ways that we can affect this signal. So for this exercise, I'm going to change the sub oscillator and I'm going to send it directly out. So it will not pass through anything in the effects. It is now strictly just a sub. We're going to open up oscillator 2 and we're going to set it up the same way. So we've got a basic shape. We've got our phase percentage set to 0. We're going to go to 2 voices. We're going to drop down 1 octave. And then we're going to go over to our advanced tab. Same thing again. We've got that stereo information left and right. We're going to bring left and right to the center. So pull our stereo unison down. And there we go. I'm just going to turn off the distortion in the effects tab for now. And I'm going to turn off oscillator 1. Right, now what we're going to do is we're going to use oscillator 3 as well, but we're not going to use oscillator 3 as a extra signal on our master output. What we're going to do is we're going to use oscillator 3 as a modulator or an operator. So in order to make that work, we first want to make sure that we bring the output level of oscillator 3 down so nothing comes out. We're going to change the sine wave and we're going to bring the phase down to 0 so it's set up the same way. Now what's going to happen is oscillator 3 is going to feed into oscillator 2. Something that we hear in a lot of modern D&B is the use of FM or frequency modulation. So depending on where this pitch is set is going to affect how this sine waves, harmonics, and positive and negative movements, essentially the waveform is affected. So I'll bring the signal down and listen to what happens to the sine wave. Sorry, we need to set that FM from oscillator 3. Sweet. So to some of you listening, depending on how trained your ears are, you'll start to recognize some sound or timbre that is familiar to some modern D&B tunes and techniques. So what we then do with our FM is we can set up something to modulate this to do what we want. Now, you could use an envelope, you could use an LFO, you could use an LFO set up as an envelope. It's up to you. So let's just experiment. And I'm going to bring the value of this down. I think I might make this byte. I'm going to switch it to envelope. And I'm going to change the value. Just experiment. Actually, one thing I think is important to show you guys right now, in case you try to build a whole entire bass like this, let's just take that away. Please pay attention to this analyzer, and we've got our sub here, right? Now watch what happens to the peak. It's pretty much hitting 0 right now, but watch what happens as I apply frequency modulation. We get more harmonics, but look what happened to the sub. It's way down here now. So we've lost a huge amount of amplification and peak value. So you start losing the subs. And then pay attention to what happens in the really low information way out of audible range. Not really ideal way, because we're starting to lose the sub. So it's now becoming like a mid bass, and that's fine. You could set up your session to have just a dedicated sub bass in its own channel. A lot of people work that way, but maybe you want to build your sub into the patch and have it all packed into one. So what we can do now is we can set up oscillator 2, which is our output, and we can send that to our filter 1, and we're going to set up a high pass filter again. We're going to go to 24 decibels per octave. We'll bring the resonance down. But what we're going to do as well is we're going to add key tracking. So what key tracking will do is it'll follow, the filter will follow whatever note I'm playing. So we'll just use this note here as our baseline for doing this tweak. So you can see there's the sub information. Let's cut it out. That'll do. Cool. And now we can just add in oscillator 1 again, which is just a sub. And we don't have to worry about FM affecting our sub frequencies. Okay, now let's add LFO back in, LFO 1 back in. And start to experiment. Now what we can do with our operator, oscillator 3, is it's now set at the moment to 0, which is the default position. Okay, so when we change this, we can affect the harmonics of it. So we could match it, we could bring it down to -12, and you'll hear that the FM starts to change its sort of tonal vibe. Bring it up an octave. Starts to get more screechy when you do this. All right, and then another thing that you can do is you can do transposition snap or transpose snap. So if this was a C, we could say that's the root note, and then we can go, I want to add a 5th chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then when we change the transpose value, we start to get increments of the natural resting position and sevenths. Starting to sound like something familiar. I'm just going to bring the level down of this. Nice. So we'll just play this along. Now what I'll do to the MIDI information, I'm just going to quantize it. Cool. And one thing I can hear that we could do with this particular patch is we've now got an accent, and then the sub comes through. So let's turn on the distortion, add a bit of grit, and then we'll add in some delay. And you can hear, let's turn off the sub oscillator for a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the mix up so I can hear what the delay is actually doing. In here we've got the frequency, so at the moment it's delaying over the entire frequency spectrum. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this in and just focus on the highs. Alright, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to a stereo ping pong. So it's going to delay from left to right to left to right. And we're going to bring down our left side to a quarter, and we're going to bring our right down to a quarter dotted. Putting the mix down to the default position. But we've got a whole lot of stereo information, some really wide information. So I'm going to go to the global spread of the synth, and I'm going to drag it in. Bring it down to maybe 60%. That'll do, 70%. So now I know all of my information sitting right within the left of the right, and I'm not getting into antiphase, because when we're in antiphase space, when we're running through a mono system, there's a strong likelihood of a weak signal or even our signal disappearing altogether, and we don't want that. All right, now we could change the rhythm. We could maybe go for 8s. You can do whatever you want with this. See what this sounds like. So yeah, I mean, it's not the most groundbreaking bass line in the world right now. This is purely for the sake of educating you guys. But let's go over to the next point, and let's open up the reverb, and I'm going to turn off our sub oscillator again, open the effects, and I'm going to turn the mix of the reverb all the way up so I hear what it's doing. And I'm going to cut out the low end information so that we don't get a muddy signal. Something like that. All right, and then we can go here and we can start to adjust the actual low information of reverb. And we can adjust the high information of the reverb. Having it open will make it brighter, and bringing it down will make it darker. Now, what you want to think about with this high open point of the high reverb and low is that it will essentially make the reverb either really bright and up front, or when you make it darker, it sort of rests it back in the background. So in context of the other elements of your music and the tune that you're building, where you want that to sit inside of the staging area, whether you want to push something back and make it a bit darker and in the background, or you want to bring it to the foreground. I'm just going to set it back a bit. Okay, and then we'll bring the mix back to its default position. And then we'll bring in our sub again. Yeah. Now, I might just jam out a different bass line. So I'll just duplicate that across and we'll start jamming with it. Now why I'm doing that is because I'm listening for what the patch is suggesting to me. So, because I've got this FM set up and I've got this envelope running, I'm like, well, what if it did like some like reintroduction of that harmonic information? So let's get LFO2 and chuck it on. We'll bring the amount of it down. And I'm going to add a delay. So this will delay how quickly this LFO is introduced. So we'll listen to the accent. And then, yeah. Dotted. Maybe change to a sine. Change our amount. Notice how the more I apply the FM to it, because I'm sitting just underneath it, it's not really catching the delay so much. It's hitting the reverb but not the delay. The more I push the frequencies up, the more it catches the delay. Bring in the other bass line again. Alright, so we could do some stuff with the legato. So we'll put a legato on, and when we layer and make these overlap, it'll allow our signal to kind of overlap itself. Why is that one working? Oh, our voices. My apologies. Let's bring it down to one voice. Yeah. So we're now working in monophonic and not polyphonic. I should have actually corrected that at the start, but that's okay. We'll just jam out one part of the bar and get a feel for this. Let's go. Yeah, I'm going to make those overlap. Alright, and then we could make some slices in the MIDI to reintroduce the accent. Something like this, maybe. Yeah, starting to get some like little running rhythms in the delay and stuff, which is, you see, like when you're building these patches, I know that what I'm making is maybe not impressing some of you connoisseurs out there, but this is the thing about sound design. As you start moving through, you start to find stuff. It's just this process of constantly building. So we'll keep running. I'm gonna bring that back so it overlaps, but I'm gonna chuck a cut in on the MIDI just here, and we'll see what this sounds like. I don't know if any of you guys have picked up on it, but with those delays and the reverb, as it was cycling through the loop, you would have noticed that the delays sounded kind of different, and that's because there was probably some phasing going on, so it was changing the texture and the timbre of it. I don't actually mind that because it means that simple loop is going to be a little bit different every time, and these are the kinds of happy accidents that you run into. But the one thing I know for sure is, regardless of what's happening in those upper frequencies, my sub, because I've got that sub punching out directly out, is going to be solid. Now I'm just going to go back through as it's playing. I'm going to go back to my effects chain, and I'm just going to apply a bit of compression. Switch it to a single band. I don't want multi-band on this. It'll always open in multi-band. Let's keep it on a single band. So I'm going to show you guys something here. When you open up the compressor in the Vital Synth, and it's also similar in Serum, you've got this range here. Now, what this does is it applies essentially what this compressor does. It has upwards and downwards compression. That's what it's called. But when you hear what happens, think about this in terms of the patch that you're making and where you're trying to get to. So when I play as it stands, we can hear the reverb and the delay pulling out. Now watch what happens when I drag this down. It's almost like a gate. So depending on whether you want that sound to ring in and out, you could go, okay, yeah, I like that, or I don't like that. So definitely pay attention to this part. When we bring it up, it opens the space up. So yeah, think about that in the tune in terms of how much space that you want or not on the tails. Another thing that we can do is we could send this oscillator over to filter 2. We had that set up for the noise base before, but what we're going to do is send this back over to a low pass, and we're going to add key tracking as well. Filter oscillator 1, filter 1, filter 2. Check what's going on here. That's what we want. Sorry, I had a complete mare there. I was wondering why that. So we're going from filter 1 and then over into filter 2. Let's go for the dirty 24. do is we can apply macro 2, so the cutoff. Open up macro 2. So now we've got a low pass. We'll put low pass filter. Bang, done. So there's another thing we can start editing and modulating. Nice. Starting to get somewhere. All right, and then what I'll do to this filter, I'm just going to bring it down. I'm going to apply an envelope to it. That's cool. So yeah, we can start to really build this thing as we start moving along. Let's just play with this in the bass line. Nice. Okay, cool. So that's all I'm going to show you guys today. We've covered off the basic subs with, phase modulation, cancellation. We've covered the noise bass, and of course we've had a jam with putting some FM bass over the top of our sub. So overall, there's a lot that we can play with. The main thing that I want you guys to take away with today is using this technique, going through the middle, staying in mono, using phase modulation cancellation to create rhythm and beating. Have a jam out with it. If you're a jungly person, get an amen break, do this bass, you'll be pretty much all the way there. But as you can see from showing you things with FM, there's more modern directions we can take it as well. So I hope this has inspired you. I hope it's given you a bit of a creative burst. And most of all, I hope you found it of value. Now, please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of this content, because it's going to help my channel to grow. Leave comments below if you have any questions or there's any particular content that you'd like to see. Feel free to suggest it. I've got a whole lot more stuff I can share with you guys, and I'm looking forward to doing that with you all. So thanks for joining me. Catch you soon.